Yeah. Yes.
I do a lot of reading and activity in sports, and I know from experience that heavily carbohydrate deficient in activities, so I usually have lost spaghetti.
I'm glad you mentioned that. The question is, what about someone who's very active? I'll pass this book around. It's called Raw Power, and this is a book for the raw athlete. Steve Arlen, who wrote it, is an athlete. And Mr. Universe, 1996, Bijan was a raw foodist, and he is no wimp. And so spaghetti, if you think about it, it's basically another wheat white flour product, and you can improve upon it a little bit by, maybe getting sesame spaghetti, but it's still mostly a white flour product. Even things like soba noodles, which are buckwheat, still have a lot of wheat in them. So you can be a raw foodist and still have spaghetti. If you go to the peppercorn, they have a little machine called a spiralizer, or a Joan Chen machine, and you take half a zucchini and you turn the crank. It's really fun to do, and you can either make a little angel hair pasta or big thicker noodles, and it's a trip. You've got instant pasta without the empty carbohydrates, because it's not like you're getting anything really good from the spaghetti. And then you can put, tomatoes, fresh tomatoes, sun-dried tomatoes, puree it into a sauce, throw some pine nuts in, some fresh basil. And fruit is a good source of carbohydrates. And I think most people would do better if they, got away from the wheat as well. I know that in the 70s, athletes, Dr. Elon Haas's book, Eat to Win, really promoted carbohydrates. And those theories have really fallen from, most health practitioners' way of helping athletes. Another wonderful athlete who you might look into, his website might be in the back of that book, is Dr. Doug Graham, who was a personal trainer to, or nutritionalist to Martina Navratilova, the tennis player. And so Dr. Doug Graham does a lot of work with athletes, and he does a sports camp all based on raw food and eating mostly fruits and vegetables and nuts and seeds. So again, the path of the raw athlete is not one that is untraveled. And and to hear Bijan talk, and like this big muscle dude, I was like really impressed this summer.
Who's that?
He was the Mr. Universe 1996, and he spoke at the Portland Raw Foods Festival. Yeah, he says he's mostly raw. He eats mostly raw, and he says occasionally if he's in a restaurant, he'll eat some fish, but he's mostly raw. And so for those of you who've been vegan or vegetarian and found that you didn't have that much energy and that you felt better eating meat, I want to just share with you, I totally believe that, because eating a cooked food vegetarian diet is not necessarily that invigorating. If you haven't, don't equate being a cooked food vegetarian or vegan with being a raw foodist, because it's a whole nother ball game. And yes, you had a question.
Yeah, I've studied Ayurveda and had an Ayurveda consultation recently, and you mentioned you're into it too. My constitution is mainly Vata and Pitta, which means by disposition I'm pretty thin. So I'm wondering how that Mr. Universe, I'd imagine he's probably Kapha, which is probably the heavier constitution. By nature, he might be bigger. So how does that, I don't know, maybe in that book, how does it tie in with someone whose tendency is, again, to be thin? And the same question you had, when you're active and burning more calories, how do you compensate?
Since I'm not an athlete myself, I would probably refer you to this book or to the work of Dr. Doug Graham. Doug Graham has written a number of books, including one called Grain Damage, where he really disses our dependence on grains. And for people who have found a paradigm that they really like Ayurvedic medicine says, Vata Pitta needs to eat these kinds of foods, a lot of those foods you can still eat, just eat them raw. In Chinese medicine, there's certain foods that go along with the different elements. Are they yin or yang, or or a metal type or an earth type? You can still eat those foods, but just find ways to eat them raw. And again, has Ayurvedic medicine brought that culture perfect health? There's a lot of people that need to practice medicine. And I think that they're onto some really good things, and there's a lot I really like from that country and that culture. But again, we don't need to get stuck just because something's traditional. We need to be open to looking towards the future. And part of me even wonders, I don't think that anyone goes into medicine with the idea that I'm going to take advantage of people, but I will just tell you, I was driving to Glenwood Springs with a friend of mine who's a naturopath, and she said, I'm thinking of going to acupuncture school. And I said, oh, great. Any reason for that? I mean, you're really well established as a naturopath. And she said, yeah, but my clients all get well and they don't come back. I'm told that if I do acupuncture, then I'll get a lot more repeat business because people need to come back, every few weeks. And again, that's not to diss acupuncture. Acupuncture is great. I certainly would do that before I would do drugs or surgery. But I really just want to encourage you to keep looking towards the first and foremost step, which is really what are we putting in our bodies every day. And are people being kept in the dark? I think that there's a lot of people out there with good intentions, but there might be something more to learn. And if you're interested in Ayurveda, a wonderful book is Conscious Eating by Dr. Gabriel Cousens, because he's an MD who's written a raw foods book with an Ayurvedic approach. So it doesn't mean that we can't bring some of the best things from those cultures and integrate them with this raw philosophy. So how about a few more questions? Equipment? Okay, I will let him do this first and then. So equipment, to set up a raw kitchen, a food processor, a food dehydrator, a blender, some good knives and a cutting board, a sink. But again, you could do without some of that. Some might have a juicer. Sometimes you could use a juicer instead of a blender, or a blender instead of a food processor. But if I were to take two things with me, I love the food processor. And the food dehydrator is a great transition step because you can make a lot of food appear like cooked food. Like if you want to have crackers, or for my Indian dish, I made chapatis and samosas, and they were dehydrated. So they tasted like crunchy and crispy and all that. And so a dehydrator, the difference between that and an oven is it takes some of the water out, but very gradually and over a period of time, usually over several hours, and it never heats the food. You don't want to heat food over 114 degrees. That's when enzymes start being killed. But you can also heat food, in the sun, or use a solar oven. But I'm finding, just to be safe, I don't turn my dehydrator up over like 105, and usually it's set to under 100. And Bed Bath & Beyond has food dehydrators for a very good price for about $60 on sale right now.
Yeah, I got one, and it's not that expensive. And I was convinced because I saw how beautiful it was in her meal there, and it didn't look. It looked like it was cooked, but it wasn't. So all these different textures. So $60, I'm going to be using that year after year. I won't notice that $60 being wrong.
Yeah, and think about, you can easily spend $60 in a restaurant for two people that are drinking a bottle of wine, easily. So, I mean, it's really, it's an investment to set up a raw kitchen. And think of all the things you don't need. I don't need a stove. I don't need all these pots and pans. I can get rid of the coffee maker, the deep fat fryer. So, have a yard sale, and it's definitely worthwhile. Thank you.
It's right at, the good price is right at Bath & Beyond, or?
Bed Bath & Beyond has a good price on food dehydrators, and their food processors are $100 less than anywhere else in town.
Yeah, I got one of those too. It's
$200,
right
$175.
You get a cheap food processor at Target that's actually really good for $40.
Okay, great, thank you.
You go to Target, you can get a food processor that's fully does everything you'll need for $40.
Okay, so even Target has some for $40. Thank you. Thank you for your patience.
That's okay. I have a feeling that a lot of people associate that